an even brighter future together. Thank you for your attention and for being here with us in this forum.
What a momentum. Thank you, Your Excellency, for opening the Saudi-U.S. Investment Forum with such a powerful, forward-looking address, setting the stage for a dynamic day of dialogue and opportunity, highlighting also the strength and depth of the Saudi-U.S. partnership. And now, ladies and gentlemen, as we move forward, today's program will feature leaders and change makers shaping global economic landscape, from innovation to investment, energy to finance. We have each session designed to spark ideas, forge and foster collaboration and drive progress. And with that, it's time to begin our first panel of the day, Striking Balance, Coordinating Fiscal and Monetary Action. To navigate this timely and important discussion, please join me in welcoming our esteemed moderator, Dina Powell-McCormick, President of PTT and MSD Partners, and her distinguished panelists. Welcome, Dina. The stage is yours.
Good morning. Good morning. It's such a privilege for me to be here this morning and to moderate this next panel. Your Excellencies, Your Royal Highnesses, Your Highnesses, I was here 8 years ago for the first summit with President Trump, King Salman, and His Royal Highness. And as Minister Al-Faleh just said, you could feel history in the making. When King Salman and His Royal Highness hosted President Trump in King Abdulaziz's historic home, and we saw the beautiful memories of the historic visit of President FDR, I realized this next period of time is really meaningful for this bilateral relationship, and that proved to be true. The next two speakers that I get to invite are also friends of mine. They're incredible leaders in finance. And today, their respective roles as Finance Minister of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Treasury Secretary of the United States could not be more consequential. Ladies and gentlemen, His Excellency Minister Al-Jaddan, Finance Minister of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and the Secretary of the Treasury of the United States, Secretary Scott Bessent. Welcome. Such a privilege, as I said, to be with you both this morning. Your Excellency, thank you for hosting us. Thank you for putting on this extraordinary summit with His Excellency Minister Al-Faleh. You and I had the privilege of working together 8 years ago on some of the extremely important partnerships and business deliverables, and we're really excited to have Secretary Bessent with us, fresh off a flight from Geneva. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Secretary. You have had quite a few weeks and a very important meeting in Geneva, a series of meetings with the Chinese counterparts, and success. It sounds like you have made huge progress in the relationship, and the next 90 days are going to prove to be critical. Can you share a little bit more about the deal, how the talks went, and what you think will happen in the next 90 days?
Good. Well, thank you, Dina, Excellency. First of all, I'm going to say it's wonderful to be here. I have a long history with the Kingdom. The governor of South Carolina, where I'm from, John West, was the ambassador to the Kingdom under President Jimmy Carter. He was a close family friend, so I grew up hearing stories about the Kingdom as a child. And then my first proper job in New York City was working for the Oleon Group. So I have a long history with Saudi. And before we go on too, I do want to have a hat tip to our moderator here. Dina Powell is the personification of the perfect internal and external public and private person in the United States.
Thank you.
Her family moved from the Middle East to Texas. She attended the University of Texas. She's had a major role in the first Trump administration, and now, for now, she's on the outside. So.
Thank you. I'm honored. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you so much.
And yes, so we had a very active dialogue in Geneva this weekend. It was very constructive. Both sides came with a clear agenda, but shared interest. We had great mutual respect. And I think what we were able to establish as President Trump and the administration began the tariff program, we had a plan, we had a process, and what we did not have with the Chinese was a mechanism. So the Vice Premier and I now call this the Geneva mechanism to prevent any misunderstandings, because President Trump and Party Chairman Xi have a very good relationship, but the relationship did not make its way down through other levels of government. So I think the important thing is that after this weekend, we have a mechanism to avoid escalation like we had before. We both agreed to bring the tariffs levels down 115%, which I think is very productive, because where we were with 145 and 125 was the equivalent of an unintended embargo. That is not healthy for the two largest economies in the world. It is not healthy for the rest of the world. So I think we can proceed from here. We have a very good framework, and as I said during IMF week in Washington about 3 or 4 weeks ago, there is a possibility, it's not a certainty, but that, as Ray Dalio might say, we could do a big, beautiful rebalancing. President Trump wants to rebalance the American economy back to a manufacturing economy with high precision manufacturing. I think everyone agrees, including Chinese leadership, that they need to rebalance towards more of a consumption and consumer economy. And the dream scenario would be if somehow we could do that together.
And what do you think the next 90 days look like? It sounds like very productive meetings, and now people talking to each other, as you say. Were there areas that you kind of put to the side, or really put everything on the table?
I think everything is on the table. We have a very good framework from President Trump's first administration. There was a treaty that was signed, a trade treaty, a trade agreement that was signed in January 2020. So we're not starting from ground zero. We have a framework, and we can go from there. Obviously, many things have changed over the past 5 years. And look, what we don't want, and both sides agreed, we do not want a generalized decoupling between the two largest economies in the world. What we want is the U.S. is going to decouple in strategic industries, which we saw during COVID. We had become woefully non-self-sufficient. So whether it's medicines, semiconductors, other strategic areas. So the United States will bring those industries home. But the idea isn't a generalized decoupling, and we do have a very large trade deficit with China. That could be solved in many ways, and my hope it is via Chinese buying more American goods and the U.S. selling a kind of opening up of the Chinese consumer, and then that will lead to more fair and balanced trade.
One last question on trade. President Trump has tasked you and Ambassador Greer and Secretary Lutnick to look at other countries and hopefully have other deals like you did with the UK. Do you feel good about several of those also coming through in the next period of time?
Yes, so I've been focused on the Asia deals, of which obviously China is the largest. We've had very productive discussions with Japan. South Korea is going through a governmental change, but before they went into the election cycle, the South Koreans came with very good proposals. Indonesia, who's a large trading partner, has been very forthcoming. The island of Taiwan has presented very good proposal. Thailand, so things on my side of the world, things are going very well. I think the U.S. and Europe may be a bit slower. My personal belief is Europe may have a collective action problem, that the Italians want something that's different than the French, but I'm sure at the end of the day, we will reach a satisfactory conclusion.
Great, thank you. So Your Excellency, we were talking backstage about 2017, when really not many people in the world had heard about Vision 2030. And in 8 pretty short years, it's really remarkable to see all that the kingdom has done in social, economic, and political reform. You have been a key leader in diversifying the Saudi economy, in bringing investment here to the kingdom. Give us sort of, in your view, the status of Vision 2030 and the unique partnership between our two economies.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here and for really insightful thoughts. Before I answer the question, I just wanted to comment on His Excellency's comments. In Washington, I actually pushed His Excellency a little bit more than what I would usually in the IMFC meetings. And actually, there was a lot of wisdom in the room. There was really, it gave me a lot of hope, and I actually spoke about it publicly, saying that what I've heard in Washington, and particularly from His Excellency, gives me a lot of confidence that the world is not as in a chaos or in a difficult situation as a lot of people are seeing it. I think there is a plan, and hopefully we will see a resolution, and we started seeing this. So thank you, Mr. Secretary. And Dina, thank you also for all the support that you provided to the relationship. The Saudi-U.S. relationship is, as His Excellency Khalid Falah mentioned, is 92 plus years old, and it gets stronger and stronger every year. And if you just look at the amount of investments from Saudi in the U.S., it's really significant compared to the size of an economy like Saudi Arabia. It's way, actually multiple folds of any other nation, i.e. any other nation we invest in. And the same the other way. There are a lot of investments from the U.S. in Saudi Arabia, and particularly since the start of Saudi Vision 2030, we have seen actually a significant pickup. Saudi Vision 2030, and I'm sure a lot of the attendees here are aware of what Saudi Vision 2030, but in brief, it's really a long-term vision, a North Star, that actually for the last 7-8 years drove significant part of the society, if not all part of the society, towards one goal, which is transforming this nation economically, socially, and financially to a more sustainable path. We were significantly reliant on one commodity for an extended period of time, which was basically so volatile. So you have the booms and busts in the economic cycles, depending on where the oil price is, and that was not sustainable. So when you have a leadership that actually sets a very clear vision, mobilize the nation behind it, people of Saudi Arabia then really owns it, and they see that actually this is their vision, this is their country, this is their transformation. That's what happened. What happened in the last 7-8 years is incredible in a lot of ways. And I'll give just a few examples. I mean, if you look at some of the very difficult structural changes that requires quite an extended period of time, private investment as a percentage of GDP. I mean, this is a structural anchor in any economy, and to shift it, to increase it, it takes really ages and decades sometimes. We had more than 50% growth in the private sector investment as a percentage of GDP, from 16, short of 16 to about 23% now. That is significant. Mm-hmm. This is a long-term investment. The capital formation is significant. Unemployment, we have in the last quarter the lowest unemployment in Saudi history ever, 3.5%. And amongst the nationals, amongst the Saudis, we have achieved our target for 2030 last quarter, which is 7%. Women empowerment is significant. So bringing half of your society to the productive part of the economy is significant, and that drove a serious change. You know, moving from 17% of women participation in the workforce to 36% is a serious structural change. I could go on, but if you look at even, just I'll leave you with one note, in the tourism, which basically then connects to mobility and logistics, etc. Tourism, we had a target of 100 million visits as per the Tourism International Organization for 2030. We achieved that 2 years ago, simply because there were a lot of attractions in Saudi, and then the nationals did not have to travel abroad. They then had significant expansion of local tourism in addition to inbound tourism. So a lot is happening. In the context of, just reminded by our discussion backstage, a few weeks back when we met in Miami, we talked about what is really happening in Saudi and what kind of investment and investors are we attracting. And we touched on the family offices.
Families and founders.
And that is significant. And I think having that kind of discussion and just showcasing what is happening in Saudi Arabia to the individuals in the U.S. is critical, and I think it's an area where we are focusing on. His Excellency Khalid Faleh, I think, touched on some of this in his speech.
You know, it's so interesting because most of the capital so far has been institutional in nature. And we're seeing at BDG and MSD Partners a number of our families eager to come to the kingdom, eager to actually work with the Olian family and the Saudi families here as well. So that there is this shift that I'm seeing, or not a shift, maybe an addition of capital, Mr. Secretary, you, most of your life, were an investor. And in fact, you were known as one of the greatest investors of your generation. You saw a few global trends before other people did, made some big bets. Part of that definitionally means you know how to manage volatile markets. You recently said we should be prepared for some bumpiness as we try to reimagine the U.S. economy. And there are 3 pillars you have talked about, which is reimagining trade, enacting the tax cuts that President Trump started in 2017, and deregulation. Can you just talk a little bit more about those three?
Yes, and I would also say, just to reiterate, the strength of the U.S.-Saudi relationship, I believe it was my second or third day at my desk, I went around the world, and my first two calls in the evening was to the finance minister in Tokyo. Then the following morning was to His Excellency. So that shows the priorities of the U.S. government. This will be President Trump's first trip. This would have been President Trump's first trip abroad, if not for the death of the Pope. This will be his first state visit. What we are attempting to do in the U.S. is to further create it as the world's premier investment destination. And the Trump economic agenda really consists of three parts. Thus far, we have seen trade, which has gotten most of the publicity, and President Trump wants to reorder the U.S. engagement with other countries. And I will tell you that the tariffs, the non-tariff trade barriers, currency manipulation, and subsidies of labor and capital are coming down quickly. So I am optimistic that on trade, we could actually see more frictionless trade globally. The second part of the agenda, which is moving better than I would have expected, and as a newcomer to Washington, I would say that it was my highest level of anxiety, was the tax bill. The 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was not passed until December, just before Christmas of President Trump's first year. I believe that we will have it passed this summer, and we will make the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act permanent. We will add more features that are very friendly to capital. We're going to bring back 100% expensing. If you build a factory, in the U.S., you can expense it immediately. The equipment for that factory can be expensed in the first year, and we think that that will be very powerful. That was the most powerful aspect of driving growth and jobs during President Trump's first term. And I believe that the permanence, so we will no longer be talking about tax cuts. Once this bill becomes permanent, this will be the law of the land for the U.S., and there will be great certainty on the tax side. And then the third side is deregulation. And I think really when I look at the kingdom, when I look at the U.S., the one thing I see is great optimism and a can-do attitude. We've seen it in states, the U.S., we have a federal system, state to state. We've seen it in states like Texas, which has very much a can-do attitude. Florida, we're seeing big migrations there. And what President Trump wants to do is make the rest of the United States more like Texas and Florida, where deregulation is down, permitting time is down. You know, what's the use of saying we are going to be an AI superpower if the permitting takes 3 years? What's the use of saying we want to expand our energy dominance if you can't get pipelines through? So we are going to deregulate substantially. It is also very good for inflation for the American households, because during President Trump's first term, what really generated the non-inflationary growth was there was a demand shock from the tax bill and from that stimulus. It was met with a supply response from deregulation, and you ended up with very strong non-inflationary growth. I think what happened under the Biden administration was you had a demand shock from government spending, and if we have time, we could come back to how we're going to get that down, but it was met with supply constriction, and that's how we got the great inflation of 21, 22, and 23. So we are really setting the stage with the trade, tax, and deregulation for what we think will be a very strong period of non-inflationary, strong growth.
Thank you, and thank you for plugging Texas, where I grew up, but Pennsylvania is very strong too.
Pennsylvania is on its way.
I'm going to give the last word to His Excellency. I can't believe we're already out of time. Tell us what you think are the biggest opportunities, finance and economic opportunities, job creation opportunities, both in the Kingdom and in the United States between our two countries.
Well, this requires another 2 hours. Dina, I mean, there are a lot, to be honest, there are a lot that can be done. I think the U.S. is the envy and has been the envy of the world in terms of the entrepreneurship spirit, innovation, and technology. And you could see that in the productivity amongst possibly every country in the G20. The U.S. stands out in terms of the growth and productivity. That's an area where we are focusing on and trying to see where we can actually utilize that kind of expertise in the U.S. to fuel the Saudi economy. We have, as few international commentators said, this is possibly a very bright spot in the international. If you look at the international map in terms of where the growth is, it's a young population, it's a technology-savvy population, it's a government that is willing to move, it's a government that does not have an ego to change when they think things are not moving in the right direction, and very agile. And I think we have this common features that I think we can, from both sides, benefit from. I would encourage, seriously, I would encourage investors who are not familiar with what is happening in Saudi to actually just have that opportunity to come and visit Saudi Arabia, meet with the Saudi investors and even the young population to see how really very much positive thinking driven this population is.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you both so much for an excellent panel and for starting off the summit so well. We're so grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Standing. Thank you. You guys are right there.
Dina.
Hello. Hello. Hey, Sarah.
We're excited for